Hello, everybody. Welcome to the memoQ Life Sciences Roundtable discussion. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I, along with my colleague Ulrich Fricke, are going to be moderating today's discussion. We're going to start off with just really quickly go through the agenda. We'll have some opening remarks. We're going to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to have a moderated discussion. And then we will have about a 30-minute Q&A session. So at any time during this discussion, if you have a question, please look down at the bottom of the screen and you can see a little Q&A icon. And you can just hit that, click that, and type in a question. Ulrich's going to be compiling them, and then we'll try to get all those questions answered towards the end of the event. I did want to take a couple minutes to explain why memoQ is hosting this event. Now, memoQ is already working with some of the world's largest life science companies, and it's fully committed to strengthen our relationship with our existing customers and developing new relationships throughout the life sciences industry. Now, we're doing this because we believe the work that is done in this industry and life sciences is incredibly important to all of us. I mean, if you think about the work that was done to get the various COVID vaccines developed, tested, approved, and to market in the last 18 months, that is a great example of the importance of the work that these organizations undertake, and also their ability to adapt to new environments. We also believe that from a purely economic point of view, the outlook for the life sciences industry as a whole is quite positive. In fact, according to several different industry associations, just one subset of the life sciences, that would be the contract research organization market, that market alone is expected to have a compound annual growth rate of over 7% over the next 6 years. And in Asia, it's over 9%, which means that in about 6.5 years, that market is going to double in size. So that's pretty exciting for everybody. Lastly, we know that many of the tools that memoQ provides align very, very nicely with the needs of life sciences organizations in terms of data security, privacy, speed, quality, and automation. Okay, so this is an industry that's important, it's growing, in one which memoQ, our TMS, brings value. Another way that memoQ would like to bring value to this community is by organizing events such as today's roundtable so that we can facilitate the sharing of information and best practices related to the translation of life sciences information. Now, we'll be doing this on a quarterly basis. We'll also be launching a newsletter with updates on regulations and best practices related to life sciences translation. Now, we chose today's focus, excuse me, of data protection and security because we know that life science organizations are facing increasing pressure to get more products to more markets more quickly. And at the same time, there's an increasing number of regulations related to data protection and privacy. So you have these two sometimes conflicting pressures, and at the same time, you still need to maintain high levels of quality and accuracy. So to help get an understanding of trends and best practices in this specific area, we've invited our 4 industry experts to share their thoughts, experiences, and observations. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists now. To start with, we're going to start from the west and work our way east, but we have Elizabeth Milkovits, Senior Director of Technology for Translations at IQVIA. IQVIA is the largest healthcare data science company and a leader in the human data science technology. Elizabeth, how are you today?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me today, Mark.
Thank you for joining us. And moving a little bit farther east now, we have Dr. Alexander Natz, who is the Secretary General of EUCOPE. EUCOPE is Europe's trade body for small to medium-sized innovative companies working in the field of pharmaceuticals and medical technologies. EUCOPE has over 900 members. Alex, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks, right? Mark. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. And last but not least, we have, I believe they're both in St. Petersburg, Russia. We have Elena Mikrioukova, who's the head of translation, and Yuri Skrelin, who's the senior translator, both for PSI CRO. PSI is a privately owned full-service clinical research organization that operates globally. Elena, welcome. How are you? I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Hello, Mark. Hello.
Great.
Lovely.
It works, yeah.
Lovely.
Great. Thank you. And Yuri, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine. Thank you for inviting me here.
My pleasure, our pleasure. I just wanted to confirm, are you both in St. Petersburg?
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
yes,
so
that's true.
what time of the day is it for you?
It's end
6
of
p.m.
business.
6 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us in your evening. Okay, really appreciate that. So we're ready to kick things off, and I wanted to start off with a very high level kind of conversation so we can understand what the current state of affairs is on this topic and what we can expect over the next few years. So Alex, I'd like to start the first question with you. Which trends do you see in life sciences in Europe which could lead to further needs in translation services over the next few years?
Thanks, Mark. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. Definitely, I mean, in translation service, I see an increased trend both at the regulatory level, but also at the pricing and reimbursement level in Europe, that we are definitely in the need of having good quality, high quality translation services. When you, for example, look at the package information leaflet and the SMPC, the summary of product characteristic, these have to be, since some years, I think almost since 8 or 9 years, they have to be in all the languages of the EU. So accuracy in translation in regulatory terms is critical. It's really definitely very important. A second example would be in patent law. I mean, when it comes to patents, you need to translate into various languages. We are now having a unitary patent in Europe, which covers all the jurisdictions. So it's really important for life science companies to have a unitary patent, and that would mean that you have to translate the patent into all the languages which are applicable. And the last example here is an increased regulation at the pricing and reimbursement level, where also, again, there is a need to translate, have an accuracy in translation when it comes to so-called health technology assessments, because we are talking about the member states doing their own assessments about drugs and medical devices to assess what is the cost effectiveness of those medicines. NICE is doing that. ASHA is doing it in France, GBA is doing it in Germany, and it's definitely a trend that you need to have all those documents translated into various languages, and accuracy, as I said before, in translation is key at the regulatory level, at the pricing and reimbursement level, and also at the patent level. And these are certainly some trends which are just starting to kick off the need for further translation services.
Thank you. And it does sound like there's going to be an increasing amount of translation required. It's a great opportunity for everybody on this call. I'm wondering, Elizabeth, from where you sit, because Alex is primarily focused on Europe. You're in the US in a global role. But from where you sit, do you see any other relevant trends that might be similar or might be slightly different?
Yeah, we see many of the same trends globally. And a lot of it is about being more proactive, about making sure that you have your translations coordinated across all of the global activities. And as Alexander was describing for Europe, we're seeing that more globally, that we're trying to really understand the full suite of translations needs for our clinical projects and for other life sciences activities that IQVIA is supporting, and really moving from a reactionary translations to being more proactive in managing language solutions generally.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I want to kind of keep a little bit at the higher level, but we're going to start drilling down a little bit now. Elena, I'd like to ask you the next question here.
Yeah, sure.
What are you seeing in the life sciences industry in terms of pressure to get products approved into market more quickly?
Well, what we do see are tighter deadlines, obviously, for almost everything that we do. Especially this has become apparent with COVID, where we are seeing that some of the manufacturers that we are working with or we are working for are now in need of getting their new products approved quicker, and they are on a faster track, and we should be there to help them satisfy their translation needs. And because of that, we need to look for new solutions of how to turn the bigger documents, such as new investigators' brochures that are brought to us, or new IMPDs much quicker than we would normally expect to.
And I'm going to come back and ask you in subsequent questions how you actually do that. So, but you are confirming the trend that you need to get, these products released more quickly. But before I start to drill down a little bit further, Elizabeth, can you confirm? Are you under similar pressures? Do you see the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And COVID really put a lot of pressure on accelerating a lot of things in the life sciences industry, but it also was a chance for people to come together to ideate on how to use technology and to improve processes and try to use automation as much as possible to try to accelerate those timelines to be able to have the rapid communications and translations necessary to make that happen.
Excellent, thank you. And again, I'm going to go on to the next question, but I want all of our attendees to know that we're going to come back and dig into the specifics of how the translation teams are actually adapting to these pressures. I'm going to go back to Alex for this next one. It's a relatively high level one, but what developments on the regulatory landscape regarding privacy, quality, and readability? And I don't know if you touched on readability on your last response there. And the required documents should translation teams be aware of. You also commented previously on pricing and reimbursement, but maybe you can explain a little bit how that mechanism works in Europe specifically.
Sure. I mean, in readability testing is another big example of that the regulatory level, and I forgot to mention that before, that there is an increased scrutiny so that the patient actually understands the package information leaflet and the SMPC. And that's what I mentioned before, that you have to translate that into various languages. And just an example. And I mean, how is this process working? I mean, you're well aware of the fact that you run, starting really with multi-centric clinical trials where you might have various clinical trial sites in different countries with different languages, and there you're speaking about the same product. You have to actually translate side effects. You have to make sure that in a clinical trial setting, SUSA reporting, as we call it in Europe, is done in an adequate manner. So there is translational services to that end, that everybody understands actually what the side effect is and takes his or her conclusions from that for future practices. But then the next step, usually in the development of a medicine, is the marketing authorization procedure, which in Europe we do through the European Medicines Agency. There is a lot of scrutiny on the product. There's a lot of scrutiny on the package information leaflet and so on and so forth. So I think here there is definitely a trend that translational services have been becoming tremendously important over the last 5 years, I would say. I mean, and as the previous speakers have been mentioned, it has been increased with COVID-19, with the crisis. Moving on to the pricing and reimbursement level, that is indeed something which is probably a bit more advanced in the EU than what it is in the US. You have what we call the fourth hurdle. It's not just about quality, safety, and efficacy. This is what EMA is doing, but it's also about the cost effectiveness of a medicine. In Europe, governments and payers will want to know how much better is it than what I actually have, and what's the price in relation to that therapy option which is already available. And you have to make your case. You have to make your case to say, I'm this and that much better than what's already existing in a certain cancer type or whatever the indication is. And for that, you rely to the regulatory documents. You need to translate them. You need to make sure that an FDA document gets understood by a payer in France, in Germany, in Italy, and in Spain. And that's probably the best example you could give. They all refer to the FDA label and to the FDA documents, which are in the public domain. because these are regulatory documents, these are strong documents to prove your case. How can you do that? You can only do it if you translate it into Italian, Spanish, French, and German. So that's really probably a very good example that what we call the regulatory documents, which we know from EMA and from FDA and from other countries, they need to be translated into the respective languages in order to make your case, to convince payers to actually pay an adequate price for the medicine. So I think that's probably a bit new. I'm not completely new for the US, but it's probably a bit more advanced in Europe. And I would even think that at this level of pricing and reimbursement, there is probably the biggest potential for growth, because if you don't take that hurdle, your product wouldn't make it to the market. So it's a critical one, what we call market access in Europe. It's the most relevant one to get your product to the patient and ultimately to get payment for it. And there you really have to make your case, and there translational services are key.
Thank you. And not to get political, but I would like to confirm that the EU is definitely much farther ahead when it comes to the pricing and proving the efficacy of medicine than what we see here in the US. But that's a whole other discussion, but thank you for that. Elizabeth, next question for you. I'm going to change. I mean, the text says has the importance. How about we can just move on to the last part of this, where it'd say, like, how have your processes and selection of translation tools or vendors or providers, how have they changed, or have they changed in reaction to these competing pressures of getting, drugs to markets more quickly, and the need for data protection and privacy? So you got these conflicting issues. Have you made any changes?
Yeah, well, so you described it well as being a conflict between these two things of, needing to be able to accelerate timelines, but also needing to honor the obligations that we have for data protection and privacy. And the data protection and privacy can't be sacrificed for the fast turnaround timelines that are necessary. So we've had to look into how to use technology to try to be able to open up a broader pool of translators for us without sacrificing data protection and privacy. So things like redaction of sensitive information that makes it safer to utilize a broader pool of translators and to honor contractual obligations, as well as trying to keep things in a closed system instead of moving between multiple systems. So we've been looking at at how data flows through our systems and how we can improve our workflows using technology and anonymization techniques and things like that to be able to accelerate our timelines without sacrificing data protection and privacy.
Excellent. And have you, are you using tools to automate some of those, like, the anonymization or the redaction of sensitive information? Are you automating it, or is it still a kind of a manual process?
We're continually working on how we can automate more and more of that, but it always starts with a manual process to understand what we need to do. But we're continually trying to explore how to use technology to continue to improve and automate.
Excellent, thanks. And Yuri, I mean, can you add anything from where you sit? I mean, have you made any changes to your processes, or the selection of vendors or tools or anything like that?
Sure. We are making changes to our processes. And if we're speaking about the speed or swiftness of translations, definitely timelines are an issue. And historically, in a number of regions, we used to rely on external translation service providers. But with the changing regulatory environment, with the changing submission timelines, we're now having to change the format of our work and switch to internal linguists instead. So, for example, one of our preferred service providers in one of the regions of PSI's operations became unable to meet our demands for speed. So we had recently to hire an internal linguist in that region, and we're now hiring another linguist to build a team in that region, because we realized that in that particular region's timelines will always be an issue, regardless of the external provider that we deal with. The same is now happening in another region where our current translation service provider is failing to deliver on time and up to our quality standards. They used to be very reliable, but it's no longer the case. So we will now be looking for a replacement. And yes, I hate to be saying that, but timelines are becoming more challenging. And both our internal teams and external vendors have to be more responsive and flexible with respect to timelines. And I would like to note here that we rarely ask our vendors, our external language partners, to be swifter than our internal teams of linguists, and being linguists ourselves, being translators ourselves, we ask our vendors to expedite only when we understand that it is really doable, it is feasible. So we're not like that proverbial project manager who asked 9 women to deliver a baby in 1 month. So we are understanding of this predicament because we are translators ourselves. But we have to be understanding of the changing timelines. And on the data protection front, our vendor selection and qualification process has become much more comprehensive and lengthy over the years. There's now a whole lot of questions that our prospective translation vendors have to respond to during the qualification phase, as compared to back in the day when there was like a small checklist and a small number of questions. And now they have to respond to a great number of questions, including those on data protection and data security that sometimes reach as far as vendors' internal policies for password, for the use of passwords, or for password changes, or for account creation, things like that. And now we're also involving quality management and information security in that process of vendor qualification. So this has also changed much. And if we're talking about the tools or the tool providers, this increasing speed and this increasing need for speedy translations has at some point put us in a situation where we realized that the use of a CAT tool is no longer optional. It is now a prerequisite to being able to keep up with the industry. So we have now completed. This is not product placement. This is presenting the true facts. We have now completed our pilot project with memoQ in a few regions of our operations, and we're now purchasing licenses for all our internal translators. So this is also changing. We have to adapt accordingly.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you also for the product placement. That's awesome. Glad to hear. I love that analogy of 9 ladies delivering, was it 1 baby in a month or something? Which obviously you're referring to splitting a job up and having multiple translators to work on it, but beautiful analogy. What I'm also hearing from you is, because we had about 150 people register for this event. I'm sure there are some vendors that have registered who are, focused in the life sciences. So what I'm hearing is, if your existing vendors are listening, you know what, it's time to, get to shift gears. And if there's any potential vendors out there, there's probably an opportunity there.
Yeah.
And I also like to confirm that one thing that we're seeing is those questionnaires, those pesky little questionnaires. They are multiplying and exponentially. And it's funny because we're spending more and more time, but it's mostly related to security compliance and CSR. And it's kind of like if you can't respond favorably to those questionnaires, you can't get to the next step in the process. I mean, it's just at the RFI level. If you can't check the right boxes, you're not going forward. So I would encourage everybody to, this is for real, serious data security, privacy. It's not going to go away. Okay, enough editorializing. I'll go on to the next question. We're going to Elena. What is the most important aspect related to data protection and security in the context of your work? Hey, you're on mute.
I would say that's awareness. That's the most important aspect, because from where we stand, we are sort of a one-stop shop internally at a CRO. So we are working directly with our internal clients, and through them, we are working with the PSIs, with the company's external clients. And without being aware of the specific needs and specific internal regulations and instructions that govern all the activities that our counterparts from various functional areas are involved in, and without knowing the requirements that our external clients have, we will be unable to deliver the service we are contracted to provide on time, on budget, and within the expectations regarding the level of quality.
Excellent. So let's just stay on that for a second in terms of, you said that creating awareness is the most important. I'd like to ask you and then Elizabeth and Yuri, all three of you, how do you effectively create awareness in your organization in terms of the importance of security and the ways to do that? I mean, Yuri, you earlier mentioned, you mentioned password hygiene, for example. How do you create that awareness and make sure that and reinforce it?
Well, first and foremost, it's being part of a team in all senses. It's not only networking and interacting with your own fellow translators and co-workers globally. It's also keeping abreast of what's happening within the company and in the industry, on top of the mandatory trainings that all of the employees and contractors are required to take. There are various workshops and there are various newsletters and periodicals that are published on the company's intranet and that become available to all of us through the information platform that we are using. That's the most important source of information for us. And secondly, there is this public awareness campaigning that can be both formal and informal. If you know something, or if you've learned something, or if you notice something of interest, don't just keep it to yourself. Do share it through the regular review calls that every one of us is attending. Do share it while chatting on some professional forums. Mention it to your internal or external clients, because through these exchanges, we create this very important environment of mutual understanding and of sharing the same common ground.
Excellent, thank you. Elizabeth or Yuri, do you have anything you'd like to add in terms of how you create awareness?
Yeah, I think that Yuri and Elena have described this really well. At IQVIA, it also starts with the qualification process, and I think that that's the first scene setting where we're placing an emphasis on data protection and security. And then that continues through to, similar to how Elena described, with ongoing trainings and SOPs and reminders. And I think that it takes a community effort to continually understand the context and the importance of what we're doing here, because it can get really easy for people to focus on just one small part and not understand the bigger vulnerabilities that are there. So continually contextualizing it with the importance of data protection, security, and the translations activities that we're doing, especially when we're working with some sensitive information sometimes. It's important to just make sure to have that context and awareness in all that we're doing.
Thank you. Alex, I'm wondering, because EUCOPE, I'm assuming that you provide workshops and educational opportunities, seminars for your members. Is security something that your membership is becoming increasingly aware of, or do you provide kind of educational opportunities, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, data protection, I forgot to mention that is increasingly important in Europe, like in the US. I think it's really critical our members are really well informed about GDPR issues, and there are many GDPR issues, especially when you transfer data to the US. And that's a day-to-day business. This transfer of data to the US is always, because you have different systems, it's always a critical thing. And our members are very much aware of data privacy issues, data security issues, and I think it's even more important when you're using translation services that data security is a given. And we educate our members very much about the data privacy issues, GDPR issues, informed consent, and so on. I mean, it plays a role in all those complex issues which I have described before. So definitely it's a key issue. And the regime in Europe has been getting a bit more stricter over the last couple of years with the GDPR taking effect.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'd just like to kind of piggyback on what Elena mentioned, that I mean, traditionally in most organizations, people felt that security was the responsibility of the IT team, or maybe a subset of the IT team, the cybersecurity team. But in reality, it's everybody's responsibility, because if you're touching company data, sensitive information, company infrastructure, you need to be aware of best practices related to security. So it's that whole education and information sharing. Hey, I saw this phishing email. It looked a little bit fishy. Sharing that information makes people aware, because again, it's a shared responsibility. So thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This one really is for Elizabeth. What are some of the best practices related to security and privacy when managing patient-reported outcomes and other documents related to clinical trials?
Yeah, so this is a specific subset of the things that we've talked about already. I mean, we found that anonymization and redaction are important, and making sure that we, because we touch so many different types of documents for clinical trials, that we understand the exact workflow that those go through. So we are continually evaluating how to improve the security of our system, and looking at the different exit points. So like where information can be accessed and who has access to it, to just be sure that we know where that information is going, because that then helps us understand where we can continue to tighten our security profile. And so when it comes to things like patient information and things that need to be redacted or anonymized, that we can actually apply those processes correctly. So we're continually evaluating our practices and improving.
Thank you. And again, a lot of that actually, if I can distill it down, it's becoming aware in terms of what you have and where it is, and what those endpoints are, et cetera. So that's again, that awareness thing is really critical. I don't know if Elena and Yuri, if you felt like you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I can only add that there's an important principle of data minimization. If I'm not mistaken, maybe Alexander would correct me if I'm wrong. It comes from GDPR and the recent changes in the legislation. So this is important if you're talking about patient-reported outcomes or other data collection forms. We need to make sure that we minimize the amount of personal identifiable information that we capture using those instruments. And at PSI, I know, although I am definitely not involved in that process, but I know that clinical operations are doing their best to educate their sponsors as to this principle, as to the implementation of this principle of data minimization. They are trying to explain that some of the elements that they would like to collect with their data collection forms of patient-reported outcomes are not really necessary. Like, you don't really need to have the patient's date of birth. His or her age would be sufficient. So when we ensure that at the start, at the onset of this process, everything is kept to a minimum, I think moving forward, we will have fewer adverse consequences with respect to data privacy. So yeah, this is one thing I wanted to add to this topic.
That is an excellent point, the whole idea of data minimization. And specifically under GDPR, one of the principles is you have to have a rational business purpose to store and keep that data. If you're just collecting superfluous data, you can be found in non-compliance with GDPR. From the US point of view, you could also look at minimization as being important because data can actually be a liability. If you're hacked and patient records are released to the dark web, for example, that becomes a liability. And I heard an example once of it's like storing a bunch of chemicals in your garage. You want to get rid of that stuff, and if you don't have a rational reason to keep that data, get rid of it. And so that minimization thing is really important. So thank you for that. On to the next question. So I'm going to ask this one to Elena or Yuri. You guys can arm wrestle over this one. Who in your organization works to implement best practices related to data protection and security? And then the follow-up will be is, how do they ensure that the translation teams, your teams, are aware and following best practices?
Well, as I have already explained, it's a team effort. I cannot actually pinpoint one single actor, one single player who would bear the utmost responsibility here, because various functional areas have their own share of responsibility, and they all have these obligations that are both statutory and also contractual, to ensure that the best practices that we should implement are actually upheld and are respected. Since GDPR requires that the concepts of data protection should be upheld by design and by default. That means that we do not only maintain practices that are safe, but if we have anything new, we need all to make sure that whatever new effort, whatever new process, whatever new activity comes to us, it's compliant, and it actually factors in the interests of all those concerned. So we have specific functional area for information security and data protection, and they, as a team, work in a very close contact with legals, obviously, but they also embrace, and these are task forces that are per course, but that also act on a permanent basis. They also embrace the project management group and clinical operations and startup teams, obviously data managers as the persons who receive all this information in a structured form and need to process it to deliver the result to our clients. IT, importantly, as you mentioned previously, they used to be the core group responsible for information security and data protection. Right now, they are our most important partner as far as this technical support is concerned. So they are our most important partners when implementing all these practices technically. But also the pharmacovigilance team, the clinical lab experts, the medical affairs and medical monitoring teams. We are all in it together.
So yeah, it's a team effort. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
I'm going to ask Elizabeth, because you're both actually IQVIA and PSI, you're both active globally, and there are different requirements around the globe. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, Asia is projected to be one of the fastest growing markets for CROs over the next 5 to 6 years. And in Asia, for example, you have privacy rules in Japan and China. and other markets that are completely, I would say completely, oftentimes not perfectly aligned. How do you, who do you work with in your organization to understand what you need to do in a specific market? And do you, because if you're talking about a compliance team, they might not understand your workflows exactly. Do you ever go to them and say, hey, you know what, I have a question about this specific workflow. What's the principle or the best practice involved?
Yeah, good question. Because part of this is that there is a strong technology component to all of this. And so the CIO team, info security, legal, all of those groups have to be involved in understanding the infrastructure side of it. But it's also coupled with workflows and who will be accessing and how. So we lean a lot on our CIO team to help us understand the infrastructure needs. And IQVIA, being a global company, we have multiple sets of infrastructure available to us that are compliant with different regulations in different segments of the globe. So we utilize the appropriate infrastructure for our data storage and for our applications. And our CIO team and info security folks are doing a lot of consultation on that. But to the second part of your question about the workflows and things, when we're doing our reviews to understand whether we have the appropriate setup and compliance and so forth, we do have to talk about the specific workflows and to go through things like the role-based authentication and access to ensure that we're really looking, that we have the appropriate implementation from a technology side and that we're using it correctly in a workflow side. So we have to shore those things up in our processes. It's not just a security review on the technical side, it really is of the holistic team effort.
Thank you. I think that's very comprehensive. Want to jump on to the next question, and I think we're kind of on schedule. I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, but we are recording this, so the recording will be available to everybody who registered for this event. So this is for Yuri, and then I'm probably going to ask for Elizabeth to chime in as well. But what tools and processes do you use to maintain linguistic quality?
Thank you. We're not a translation agency, so we are somewhat flexible with the choice of translation standards that we abide by. However, we are very much familiar with the standards accepted in the industry, and we do our best to align our internal processes, our internal procedures to the standards of the translation industry, to the current standards of the day. Some of our internal standards may even appear more stringent than those of the industry. A good example would be our entry requirements that we have towards candidates for the translator position. I know that some agencies, even global ones, even important ones, accept candidates coming from various backgrounds, provided they have extensive experience in the translation field. We, on the other hand, only hire certified translators or interpreters, or those who have a major in linguistics or foreign languages. So all our internal translators are language professionals. We also use a multi-step selection process, both for in-house translators and for external vendors that we work with, that include checking their credentials, conducting interviews, asking for a test translation with a view to assessing their qualifications. And also, speaking of our day-to-day activities, we ensure that all our translations that we perform internally or that are performed by external vendors for PSI are fully reviewed by subject matter experts. So we have a two-tier or two-step quality control system where each translation is supposed to be performed by a language professional, and then it has to be reviewed by a subject matter expert. But luckily, we have subject matter experts almost for all of the areas that we work with on a daily basis. So there's ongoing quality control for all translations that we handle, and also we have per cause checks that may be necessary from time to time. And speaking of actual tools or processes, In addition to this two-step quality control system that we're really proud of, we use peer review for translations of patient-facing documents at our department, where each translation of a patient-oriented document gets reviewed by a second translator from our department. We also employ back translations that function as a rescue quality control measure in certain situations. Most often this is required for patient-facing documents, but there may be other occasions where we use back translation. So this is just, a quick overview of the multitude of processes and tools that we use in our day-to-day activities.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. I think I remember from a previous conversation that you also have kind of ongoing education and training into the different fields. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah. We have continuous education. We have the luxury of therapeutic area trainings that are now increasingly often. They used to be conducted once a month. Now it's starting to be something like twice a month, and so all translators are welcome to join those trainings and expand their background knowledge.
Sounds like a great opportunity. Elizabeth, from where you sit, are doing similar things or anything else that you'd like to add in terms of what IQVIA is doing?
Yeah, really similar things that we're doing as well. I mean, for us, it's about aligning the right resources to the job, making sure that we have the correct workflow and level of service that's required, because we see a variety of different needs for translations. And some are just for quick coordination where people just need to sort of know what it says. And others have a much higher burden where it's going to patients and it needs to be perfect. And so getting the right workflow in place to make sure that that happens and the right resources aligned to ensure that we get the correct level of quality is really important to us. We also lean on tools to do this as well. So translation memories and term bases and glossaries and things like that. And then having a feedback cycle where we can actually continue to improve those things to improve our machine translation capabilities in the future. So that feedback cycle gets closed with the technology.
Excellent. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think you said the correct level of quality, because that's the ongoing question. What does quality mean? But it's what is necessary or appropriate for any given situation. And I'm glad that you touched on machine translation, because that leads very, very nicely into the next question, which is going to be teed up right back for you, Elizabeth, is do you see an opportunity for the expanded use of AI and or machine translation in your work?
Yeah, great question. So as machine translation has really improved in quality by leaps and bounds over the last decade, it's really become central to all of our workflows, where even all of our workflows that even involve humans and multiple reviews and back translations, we're leaning on machine translation where we can to get really good productivity gains and to get to decrease those turnaround times. So we are using machine translation in our various workflows, but also trying to utilize that as a checkpoint that for some of our workflows, depending on the content and depending on what it is, machine translation may be good enough and it can stop there. And for others, it needs to progress through to increased levels of linguist and subject matter expert enhancement and review. So machine translation has definitely become a central part of everything that we're doing. As for expanded use of other AI, we have the interesting position within IQVIA is doing a lot of different life sciences applications, including supporting clinical trials. So we see a lot of what's going on in different clinical trials. And can use AI to understand some of the processes that are going through and the progress on those trials. So we have the unique privilege of seeing all of these, what's going on in the trials. And I think that AI has a lot of applications particularly things like NLP that can help us, that some combination of machine translation and NLP can help us like triage things faster. Like if you need to know which things are serious adverse events and which are non-serious, or things like that, that a combination of AI and machine translation can help diagnose and triage. It doesn't necessarily replace people, but it can help us get more efficiency and help us flow things through our organization and coordinate our global clinical trials in more effective ways using technology.
Thank you. And I do remember a previous conversation with you as well, that you were saying that a potential use of AI was the fact that you could almost get a window on what types of documents were going to be requested next and start to prepare your workflow and kind of have better business intelligence, from that. So that's very helpful. I'm curious, Alex, either from your position as Secretary General of EUCOPE or as just a private citizen in the EU, do you have any opinion about how companies are using AI? Any concerns or benefits that you're seeing? And that could also include machine translation.
Thanks for the question, Mark. I mean, there is definitely a trend in Europe to use artificial intelligence more in the future. The European Commission is looking into this. We have an AI group in EUCOPE, and we see it more from the opportunity perspective here. I think it's really something which is a certain trend, and I think, of course, we need to have strong, and we've discussed it before, there's GDPR in place, which prevents many misusage of data, sharing of data. And I think we have some safeguards in place, which would probably ring fence the misuse of a certain technology. So I think that's critical. And the EU is very much looking into this. And I can only say, let's look at the opportunities here.
Okay, it's interesting because I mean, AI is it's one of those touchy subjects these days because a lot of obviously businesses are trying to put it to use and take advantage of it. And then you have people like Elon Musk saying it's the greatest threat to humanity. So it's kind of who do you believe? But I kind of like it when I go into a restaurant and I order and it automatically feeds up what probably I'm going to want, or when I listen to Spotify, for example, and it queues up my song list and I don't have to do the work. So that's kind of nice. But hopefully it continues to work in those type of beneficial type scenarios. I don't know, Yuri or Elena, if you wanted to add anything to that, or if we should go on to the next one. Nope. Okay. So let's go to the next question. We've got just a couple more here, and then we'll jump into our Q&A session. And again, just a reminder, if you have any questions at all, please hit that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and ask a question. And we'll get one of our panelists to answer. This is for, I'm going to make this open, but I'm going to start off probably directed to Elizabeth. But for any of our panelists, are you seeing any benefits related to speed, quality, or security from the use of eCOA platforms or ePRO platforms or ePRO platforms or eConsent platforms? Are these something that are a must-have, and are you seeing any benefits? Part two is, have you seen any attempts at integrating these type of platforms with translation workflow tools? And if nobody's going to jump out of their seat, I'm going to ask Elizabeth to go first.
Sure, I'll take it first. So really the digitization of contents enables translations workflows to be able to be applied faster. So a lot of the challenge has been around getting the documents and files that need to be translated into the translation workflows, and digital solutions help us do that more effectively and give us the opportunity to integrate translations workflows more directly. So you have translations workflows that you can integrate via API with these other tools, and that can enable us to be a lot faster and to have our translations workflows kicked off in a more timely fashion to be able to meet those aggressive turnaround times that we talked about earlier. So I think that we'll be seeing a rise in these digital platforms that will enable translations and other processes to happen in a faster fashion as well.
Thank you. And Elena or Yuri, did you want to add anything to this? You seen anything at all? Nope. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Not really. It does happen, as Elizabeth has just explained, but we are only just moving on to start seeing this integrated with the translation workflows.
Okay.
Basically, it's all in the very early stages, and that's an exploratory mission at the point, really.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but anything with the lowercase e at the beginning sounds promising. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that obviously that we're looking at very much as well. So, excellent. Okay, I've got one last question before we go into our Q&A session, and I'm going to open this up to everybody because I think you all have unique perspectives and you have your go-to resources. But for our attendees, what advice would you give for those who want to learn more about trends related to security, data protection, and quality in life sciences translations? And I also include, trends related to regulation, et cetera. So I started the introductions off in the West and worked East. Let's start in the East and work West now. Yuri, what advice would you give?
I don't know. I remember when we used to study at the university during our simultaneous interpreting course, we were taught by our professors to watch the news every day, to read newspapers every day, to keep abreast of what is happening, because you never know when this or that bit of information is going to come in handy. So this is what I would recommend doing. And when preparing for this roundtable, I also did some research and I also read the news, and I found out, for example, that in Germany, an employer cannot or may not congratulate an employee on his or her birthday without the employee's separate consent. So this is something that was on the news, and luckily I just picked it up and used it now during this roundtable discussion. So yeah, just stay open to whatever is happening around.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, there's so much news out there. There's so much information. Do you use tools like Twitter or something like that to kind of, what's the word, kind of curate
Sure.
news that you receive?
Sure. We use Telegram.
Telegram. Okay.
Yeah, and I greatly recommend it. It's it used to be a Russian, or it originated in Russia. It was created by one of my university's fellow students. So I'm not sure if it is that popular in the US, but I strongly recommend it because you have an option of doing the same thing that you did with Twitter, but you are exposed to a greater number of interesting channels and groups, things like that. So this is one of the tools that I use on a daily basis.
Thank you for that. Elena, did you have anything you want to add?
Well, I do absolutely subscribe to what Yuri gave as his piece of advice, and I would also mention being broad-minded and really open. And as language professionals, as translation professionals, obviously, whenever we are trying to learn about something, we do any of our searches starting with translation and trying this sort of applied approach. We're trying to learn about new things, be it information security or data protection. We are always prone to add as applied in translation industry or as applied in interpreting or wherever. But I would say just drop it for a while and go and hunt for more information generally.
Excellent.
See it where it starts actually, and only then move on to narrow down your searches.
So always be learning, be aware. That's great. Alex, any suggestions, advice?
Yeah, I would echo what the previous speaker said. I think Yuri mentioned it about Germany. I think on data protection, I talked before that there is a good ring fence in GDPR, but we have to make sure that we're not stretching things too much in terms of data security here, and in terms of what is allowed and what's not allowed. As I said before, I think many opportunities. I think quality is key in translational services, and a lot of opportunities also when it comes to artificial intelligence. So really important, something to be looked into. I certainly mentioned the trends in Europe here with HTA, and so I think on data security, I hear more and more, also speaking as a lawyer, that companies and also people feel a little bit restrained from sharing anything. So I hope that the interpretation of GDPR is strict, but it's not too strict in a way that it's not preventing more of what we want to do than what it allows for in a way. And I see there is a certain trend in Europe that people would question the value of some of the interpretations of GDPR also in healthcare. That I mean, for example, if you want to do a genetic test, and I had a call this morning, if you want to do a genetic test in the US and then get this test results over to Europe, it can be a very complex thing to transfer this data. Of course, it's personal data, very critical data when we're talking about genetic tests, and there's for good reasons that that we protect this data. There's no doubt about it, but we don't want to prevent people from doing those type of tests. So data protection law should not prevent us from using technology in a way. And this is also what I said before, when it comes to artificial intelligence, I think there are a lot of opportunities. As I said, the European Commission is looking into this. We have a specific working group dedicated to artificial intelligence. We need to make sure that the quality is good. And probably there is also CE mark for those type of services when it comes to diagnostic tests and so on. So we need to have safeguards, but also, and that's my plea here, but also to make sure that these safeguards which are in place are not preventing us from doing using technology which is beneficial for patients.
It's excellent advice and observations. And you need, I'm going to try to make an attempt at humor here, but it's important to get consent when you're dealing with informations or when you want to wish somebody happy birthday. So, which is a funny kind of thing in the US, where we're kind of leaning in that direction as well. But okay, no more editorializing. Last but not least, and we're getting almost as far west as I am, Elizabeth, what advice would you give?
Yeah, great answers so far. I think the other things that I would add to it are that there are some great conferences where people cover trends and share information, and just networking. This community has a lot of really knowledgeable people who enjoy sharing knowledge. So as different trends are emerging around security and data protection and quality, staying connected to professionals in this industry and sharing knowledge helps us all improve this industry as well. So people are often willing to share what they've learned about what's going on and to explain what they've been able to figure out on their own and in their companies, or what they're seeing in the industry in general. So networking is a really powerful tool that I'd always encourage people to try, because you can learn so much from the wisdom of other people.
I think that's some great advice. Conferences and just networking. And what I find with this industry in particular is people are very, very kind and generous with their time. For example, you four panelists agreeing to do this, but above and beyond that, it's just people are really, really helpful. So it's some very nice advice. Okay, I've gone over my allotted time by 4 minutes here. Ulrich's going to come on now and moderate the Q&A session. But thank you so much for that conversation. And Ulrich, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So far, I'm going to share my screen. So you can see the questions I have here. I've got. So can you see my screen? Yes, I guess. So we have One very specific question that came up in the very beginning from Kevin. He's asking whether EMEA is itself already offering translation services. I'm not sure if anybody of you can answer this one, perhaps Yuri or Elena, because actually none of the panelists is really working in an LSP, so probably you're not aware, but I didn't want to leave it out. So perhaps Yuri, Elena, do you have any idea?
Well, what I can say, what we have been seeing is that there may be some translations, but if we are to use a specific document, a specific SMPC or patient information leaflet in a particular country, we will need to be relying on the specific requirements that the country has, that the regulators in this specific country have, and those are not always observed in the translations we may be receiving from external sources. So we would still need, if not to rework such a translation, at least to proofread it and to tweak it a bit in consultation with our regulatory affairs and quality management department, most likely. But most cases, and if it concerns clinical trials specifically, if a particular product is purchased on a particular territory, for example, if we need to use, let's say, a product that's produced and marketed in Romania, even if we have an SMPC for the drug available from EMEA, we will still need to translate the SMPC for the marketed product in Romania, even if the IP is the same.
Okay. Thanks, Yuri. Anything you want to add to this topic?
No, I don't have any idea about the EMAs offering their translation services, but I think it is quite possible. A lot of regulators and ethics committees in the US, for example, they have their own translation providers, so they provide translations. So maybe the same holds true for the EMA, but we haven't been exposed to that, so I'm unable to confirm that.
Okay, thank you very much. Alexander, perhaps you have ever been in touch, you ever heard about some specific services EMA is offering?
I'm not really sure about it. I could imagine that EMA wants to safeguard or make sure that the best services are actually used for the translation of PILs and SMPCs. That's for sure. Whether they provide those services themselves, I've never heard about it. It is possible, or maybe they just refer to certain providers in order to have a safeguarding in terms of quality. But certainly, what I mentioned before is that these documents and these translation services are very much monitored by EMA and by the regulators, and that's a point I wanted to make. Whoever is doing that work later on is a different question, but it's an example that regulatory documents, which are in the hand of the patient and the physicians, need to get translational services. Well, the EMA is not itself a service provider. I don't think they themselves would provide these type of services, but they might have somebody at hand or give recommendations or say like, but I've never heard of any service like that EMA is offering that.
Yeah, and still, if it's legal, the legal responsibility, I can't imagine that EMA will ever take it over. So it's still with as Elena, you put it, it's still with the company itself. So somebody has to take the responsibility. Thanks very much. So the next one, it's we already talked about machine translation, and one question it's from Ali and the other one from Anna. They are connected, and I wanted just to, even if we already touched it, it's still quite interesting because we are not only talking about machine translation using an internal machine. It's still this part, it's Anna mentioned DeepL, but there are others like Google Translator or others. So it might be quite interesting focusing or discussing this aspect again, machine translation, using an external service provider. Perhaps Elizabeth, you could elaborate on this one.
Yeah, these are great questions that lead to something that I probably should have said it the first time that we were talking about machine translation, which is that the configuration of your machine translation setup, how you're accessing those engines, is really critical in order to have the appropriate data protection and security. So you don't want to just go to Google Translate and use the version that's available on the web, because when you do that, you're releasing that data and then it's out of your hands. When you set up with machine translation engines through an API, depending on the configuration, some of them are configurable such that the data remains yours and it remains protected and it's not shared with anyone and it can remain secure. So it's really important as you use different machine translation solutions that you integrate those correctly into your workflow so that you can still keep the data protection and security that's necessary for that. So once you have that configuration, then machine translation becomes a really important part of the way that we can gain a lot of efficiency by using machine translation and post editing. So assuming that you have that appropriate setup, then it becomes a real efficiency gain for us.
Okay, Yuri, Elena, your point of view on this one, machine translation, internal, external?
I think that there used to be a time when we would say big no to machine translation, but everything is changing now. Machine translation is becoming increasingly efficient. And if timelines are going to change the way they are changing now, I think we will have to use that at some point for sure. So again, I think I've already mentioned that at the beginning, we have to adapt to the changing environment. So yes, and machine translation is changing, and I think that our stance on machine translation will change at some point in the future.
Thank you very much.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true, absolutely. And what I would like to add is that there are some misconceptions, specifically because of the tighter deadlines and this big pressure time-wise that we are getting from every direction, that very often we would be almost forced to say that okay to machine translation and probably and possibly no to post-editing. Just forget about post-editing. If the machine translation is that advanced, if it produces such reliable and good results, why bother about post-editing at all? So this is something that we should keep in mind, that this is not just an arbitrary element that may be given up on at any moment when we need a fast turnaround. No, it still needs to be a very reasonable balance of things being of the desired level of quality, good enough for a particular purpose. And it's purpose-driven, the need for post-editing. Machine translation is inevitable at the end of the day, especially now that we are looking to the full implementation of CTR, where the deadlines are bound to grow shorter and shorter. Well, of course, this concerns the EU predominantly, but the other markets are going to just feel it backfire in a way as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting insight and aspect as well. So one final question we have. We already discussed a bit, but still I'd like, it's a question to dive deeper into it. What do the panelists expect in the future regarding data protection and data security? Especially we have the pendulum going to stricter and stricter and stricter measurements. So do you expect it's continuing that way, or do you expect, going it back and having more liberty, like some countries are not really caring of data protection, data security? Alexander, perhaps from the political view, European level, what do you think?
I think as I said before, the GDPR is quite strict, and I think the responsible person in the European Parliament about it was a German guy, and Ulrich and we were both also Germans. So the German rule of strict interpretation of data protection has been governing this GDPR, and I already have been, I'm not saying criticizing it, but I've already made a couple of examples where I think we need to be in a position to allow for technology to evolve, to allow for, I think Elena mentioned it about the know-how transfer is key in any industry, but also in any science. I mean, know-how transfer is really critical. And I feel a little bit that we have been a little bit too strict on some issues. I think the birthday example of Germany, again, German example on the stricter end of what we're talking about here, is probably not the way to go. I think that's far too strict. And we should take maybe here and there a little bit more lenient approach. Just to give an example, whatever we identify in Europe as anonymized data is something which is so strict, which nobody can ever track by any means or decode this data. So the definition of anonymized data since GDPR came into place is so strict that you basically, in order to be on the safe side, always need a consent from the patient. And the patient needs to be informed about all the details of use, and that's for good reason. But I feel that the European infrastructure of data protection has been much stricter than 5 years ago. And I hope that we get a little bit more on the lenient side. However, as a lawyer, I must say that the GDPR is existing, and there is some interpretation, some discretion on how you live it in a way in practice. And I hope that this interpretation allows for more leniency in a way to allow science and know-how transfer to flourish and to evolve.
Okay. So, Elena, what do you think?
Well, I think that there's been some criticism. EORTC has published a paper, some discussion points relating to GDPR principles, and quite a few of those do resonate. Alexander mentioned anonymization, and it actually makes experts think whether it's really good for science, because full anonymization makes data untraceable. It can be tracked back to a particular patient or to a particular part of the population. And sometimes this link is essential for making informed and valuable decisions about the topic or the IP or the device that's being researched. So there are limitations. There is safety in data protection and information security, but there are also limitations to further progress, to developing new treatments, and to actually making new discoveries that humanity needs to continue living.
Okay, thank you. Yuri?
Yes, thank you. I have been working in this industry for more than 16 years. And over this period, I have been witnessing how the industry is changing. And what we have been seeing is the tightening of regulations, lengthening of informed consent forms with respect to data privacy, and not a single step in the opposite direction. So I think, not as a translator, but as a human being, I think there's going to be a time when the pendulum would swing back in the other direction, when people would say, that's a bit too much. We don't want that level of privacy. We want the world to know us by our real names, not by some randomly assigned identifiers. We want the world to know our dates of birth so that they could congratulate us on those actual dates of birth. So I think there is going to be a time. Obviously, it's not going to happen within the next 4 to 5 years, but when there's action, there's always a reaction. So I think there will be a reaction at some point that will put this whole process into some sort of equilibrium. At least that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, thank you. And now I'm quite curious, Elizabeth, in the United States, the approach is quite different. So I'm really curious what you are thinking, what's going to happen in future.
Yeah, so with IQVIA being a global company, we often are looking at the global trends as well. So we're affected by the things that are happening in Europe and Asia and all over the globe as well. But I think that Yuri described it really well as this pendulum that we've been seeing recently, these over the last decade or more, this trend to get more and more and more and more restrictions. But we're seeing that end up slowing down processes at the same time as things are supposed to be speeding up. So it will be interesting to see how we reach that equilibrium. But I agree that we can't continue to restrict and expect to be able to also accelerate the timelines. And there's going to have to be some balance for how we maintain scientific integrity and maintain the level of context that's necessary while moving towards something that is protected and secure the way that we need to, because it's no doubt that data protection and security is important, but if we take it too far, we can end up going counter to our intentions to be able to advance science. So there will definitely need to be an equilibrium point at some point reached, and it'll be interesting to see how that pendulum swings.
Okay, thank you very much. There just came in another question. Just let me drop it here. It's Josh asked whether what programs your daily use or your company has for translating and managing translations. So that's a question. Elena, you want to answer that one?
Yes, I can take up this one. I believe that by programs we use daily for translating any software such as CAD tools. As Yuri mentioned, we made our choice in favor of memoQ as far as machine translation is concerned. We are still thinking. We are on our fact-finding mission. We are assessing the pros and cons. So this is not something that we've adopted already. For managing translations, it's a hybrid approach. We are looking towards integrating into the information platform that PSI uses as a corporate solution, and that would be a translation manager software that would bring the internal clients, all the employees and contractors within the company, with the translators that are acting as internal linguists and also as translation managers for supervising and processing outsourced jobs.
Okay, thank you very much. Mark showed up, so we are perfectly in time, I guess. 6 minutes left, and there are no other questions, so I'm happy to hand over. Thanks a lot for this discussion. And
so, Ulrich, thank you for that. That was excellent, and thanks for the responses. Before closing, I'd like to remind everyone that this discussion has been recorded, and it will be shared with you and any of anybody who registered and didn't actually make it to today's event. We had something like 10 people register from Japan. I didn't expect them to log in at like 2 in the morning to watch this, but they will get a copy of it. We're actually going to put English language subtitles on there. So any non-native English speakers or anybody that likes to read the text while they're listening, we'll have that option as well. I would like to ask all of you, the attendees and the panelists, to later share your feedback and suggestions for future events. We'd like ideas in terms of topics that you find interesting, timely, and suggested panelists as well. Lastly, I'd like to thank, well, all of my memoQ colleagues and I and Ulrich would like to thank the attendees for your questions and for attending this event. A very special thanks to our panelists, Elizabeth, Alex, Elena, and Yuri. You guys did a totally awesome job. I mean, this is our first time to do this, but I know there's a lot of valuable information here. We're going to be sharing this, both the transcript and the videos on different channels, but this was really, really a fun and I think valuable experience. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at our next roundtable event, and hopefully we can meet one day in person sometime soon. Thank you, everybody, and I wish you a great remainder to 2021. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.